Okay, my name is Aaron, and today we're going to be talking about advanced lazy loading. So I'm here because I love Angular, and if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm Aaron Frost on Twitter. I got a chance to visit Israel for the last few days with Shai and Uri Shaked and Craig Spence. We went up north and we saw a lot of cool things. I saw the Syrian border, which was cool. I never thought I'd see that. And we saw this arc, which was really cool, this arch. And when we were there, we saw a sign that was kind of confusing for Shai and for Yuri and I. And it said that there's no Angular parallel repelling allowed, which I thought was weird. That React developers and Ember developers can repel in Israel, but not Angular developers. Anyway, okay. So we're talking about lazy loading today. There's a lot going on with lazy loading, and it's pretty easy. But when you get into a bigger role as like an architect or a principal engineer on a large project, lazy loading starts to play a larger part of your role, and it starts to come in more handy, and needing to understand how to make your app run more optimally in production becomes more difficult, and it consumes more of your time. How many people here look at their page speed scores? Okay, a couple hands went up. I was nervous for a second, no hands went up. All right. Lighthouse scores, anyone looking at their Lighthouse scores? Anyone developing for mobile? Couple. Anyone like focusing on like 3G connection type scenarios? Any hands? Couple hands went up. All right, perfect. So if you're in any of those scenarios, and hopefully a lot of us are, lazy loading matters immensely in those scenarios. So first we're going to talk about what is lazy loading, because there's actually quite a bit going on. And then we're going to go through the basics, and I'll explain the simple changes that happened with Angular version 8, so that we're all up to speed on that. And then we'll kind of get into some advanced scenarios where a lot of us don't focus because it's difficult, or we're not sure how to do it. It's not clearly spelled out in the docs. Or there's a lot of misconceptions as well, and we'll kind of go over those scenarios. But it's so easy that a lot of people are like, why are we even talking about this? Like, lazy loading has been solved. We all know how to do it. How is this even a thing? How many people here started developing and they started with like the Angular CLI? The Angular CLI is like their main way of building projects ever. How many people go back to like they've had a Webpack build or a Gulp build or like Broccoli? Anyone use Grunt? Some Grunt hands. Anyone pre-Grunt that just built Node scripts to build their stuff? A couple hands went up. Good. Okay, good. All right. So a lot of us have been around, from what I can see, and we've seen some of the difficulties around lazy loading and how far we've come. We've also had to build our own lazy loading strategies. And how simple Angular makes it trivializes a very difficult problem. And we're going to walk through some of those things. Some people, they need to lazy load for different reasons. Like, some people will get really technical. There's no way to accurately track a user's internet connection speed, but some people, they'll best they can, they'll try and see the user's current internet speed, and given their internet speed, they'll load different things randomly. Not randomly, but like contextually. And that's something that we need to know how to do. Does anyone use any large libraries? Anyone still use jQuery? Anyone use like D3? Any D3 users? Yep. Anyone using like some 3JS for WebGL or anything? Anyone have like a PayPal button on their website that the second the PayPal button appears, like that means we have 70 kilobytes extra in our deliverable? There's a lot of reasons why we need to lazy load code, and not just when routes are changing. And we're going to kind of talk about some of those things today. And as you get into more of those scenarios, lazy loading starts to take up more and more of your time. So we're going to kind of break this down today. And we're a lot of us take for granted what Angular does, so we're gonna kind of break it down, and we're gonna kind of go over some of the basics around lazy loading and some of the details behind what's happening when we use the default load children configuration. So at a high level, here's a very simple app, right? This app has 3 routes that we can see. It has a home route, has a donuts route, and it has a donut details route, right? This is an app where this is a route configuration for an app where we would view donuts. And this app, when we come to this app, it's going to load all the code when we come to the home page. Any of those routes that we load, we're loading all the code for the app. But it's very simple. Angular makes it simple to get these pieces broken out into separate bundles. We can just make a couple simple changes, and with these changes, it starts to put things into separate bundles. And it will take our home bundle, and it will put it in one bundle and deliver it to the browser. It will take our donuts bundle, and it will put it into its own bundle. And then it will take the donut details bundle, and it will put it into its own bundle. And if we go straight to the donut details, it won't actually load the home bundle. If we go to the donuts list, it won't load either of the other bundles. So it starts to load bundles individually and separately. And this is super trivialized using these magic strings in Angular. And in Angular version 8, it's actually only slightly different. So instead of those magic strings, I'll go back and forth real quick so you can kind of see. Like if you look at that top route, the load children, instead of being a string, it changes to an anonymous function that has to return a promise, okay? And out of that promise, you have to return whatever module that you're lazy loading. So you just call import on the same, like the first part of your lazy loading string, the part before the hashtag, you just import that now, and then you do a .then, and then the string after the hashtag, so on that first thing, home module, you just return whatever module gets returned, that module dot home module or module dot donut module. So that's kind of the difference with Angular version 8. That's really the difference between Angular version 7 and prior and 8. That's the only thing you need to know. That's the only change that's happened, okay? And Craig Spence, who spoke earlier, he wrote an ng update script that will actually go through your app, and it will update this for you automatically so that you don't have to worry about changing all your load children strings. But if you didn't want to run that, this is how you do it manually. It's not very difficult. But there's kind of a lot going on in these 2 strings. Kind of comparing 7 and prior to 8. The first half of the string goes to that import syntax, and the second half of that top string goes to the callback on the promise. So these are kind of equivalent to each other in the halves of the lazy loading process that they're focusing on, because there's really 2 main parts. So I kind of want to go forward a little bit and break down those 2 main parts a little bit more so we kind of see what's happening. Because like I said, there's really quite a bit going on, and we need to break it down. So let's talk about all the moving parts by using that magic string that we threw out there. It's important to understand that so that you can get more advanced and take advantage of lazy loading in other parts of your app. So we start with the Angular CLI. And underneath the Angular CLI, inside of it, behind its API, it's using Webpack. And in the future, it's going to use Bazel. And I'm not entirely sure how Bazel changes what I'm about to explain, but I've included it just so we can kind of see what's going on. For now, it includes Webpack. And all the files that the CLI gets, it's going to run through Webpack. And so in our app that we kind of already showed in that previous route configuration, we have 3 features in 3 different folders. And those 3 folders, they get funneled into the CLI, and the CLI takes them and outputs them into one JavaScript deliverable that the clients are going to get. And when we add in lazy loading, it takes the first bundle, and it will say, hey, I'm going to take that magic string you defined, and the Angular CLI is going to output one bundle for it, and I'm going to take the second bundle you used that load children magic string for, and I'm going to create a separate bundle for that. And then I'm going to take the third one, and I'm going to create a separate bundle for that. So using that magic string, that's how we key in Webpack to say, hey, this is where I want you to separate the bundles out. So that and there's even more going on than that, but that's like at a entry level, kind of how we key into Webpack or how we will key into Bazel. This is what's going on. Like this is what we want to lazy load. And all this process, this is just the first half of that lazy loading bundle. There's still a whole second half that we still need to talk about. So that process I just kind of covered. That's just the first part of that lazy loading string or this new lazy loading import syntax. So it tells Webpack create a separate bundle, and then it loads the bundle when that route is visited, right? And those are the two main pieces that first piece is doing. But there's still a second piece, and what does this do? So let me kind of talk what this does. So what's going through here is Angular has this thing internally called the ng-module factory loader. Okay, and this is pre-Ivy. I don't understand 100% what this looks like post-Ivy. But it has this ng-module factory loader, and this is what it uses to say, hey, call the server and load another remote JavaScript bundle. And the one that's built into Angular, they actually implement the ng-module factory loader interface, and it's called the System.js ng-module factory loader. And that thing will fetch the bundle, which we talked about in the previous step. But then the next step, which is where the second half of our string, the highlighted piece, is it will pull whatever that highlighted piece is out, and it will give that back to Angular, and it will say, hey, I need you to load that into Angular. I need you to make Angular and all of its injectors aware that there's a new bundle here with a bunch of things inside of it. So that's what the second half of this is doing. It's registering our code with Angular. And then after that, in the router kind of, once this is all done, once it's registered, it returns control back to the router and says, hey, now that I've lazy loaded this, do you now have any new routes that will match the route that's loaded? And then it goes ahead and it proceeds to just regularly, using Angular, load the lazy loaded stuff. So that's kind of the process that's going on. Now, for manual lazy loading, if we wanted to go out and we wanted to manually lazy load something, like let's say we had a bundle that we didn't want to load, or we do want to load it, but not on a route change. So imagine you have a modal that's not tied to a route change. And that modal has a giant chunk of code in it, right? Maybe it's a third-party lib. You don't have control over the size of this third-party lib. And you don't want to load that lib when the previous parent route loads. You want to load it only when they open this modal, because maybe the modal gets opened like a rare percentage of the time, right? Or maybe it's only there if they're an admin user or something. When that happens, we need to manually lazy load our code. And this isn't like apparently obvious to a lot of us, how to lazy load code outside of routes. And that's kind of what we need to go into. One second. And so we're gonna, when we lazy load manually, we have to do these same two pieces. We still have to indicate to the CLI, make a separate bundle for this thing that I want to lazy load when I want to lazy load it. And then we have to say load it, and then we have to say register it with Angular, and then after that we have to load whatever component that we want. Because when the router is lazy loading, it has a route config that says when this route's loaded and it lazy loads the bundle, it says I'm going to load this component. But we don't have a route config for lazy loaded components, so we actually have to tell it which component we want it to load. So I'm going to kind of walk everyone through that in a demo in a little bit. So that's largely how Angular lazy loading works today. But I want to talk about one of the biggest misconceptions in lazy loading with Angular. And as I've worked with a lot of teams and I've talked to a lot of Angular developers at conferences, in consulting or at the workplace, there's one very large misconception that a lot of us have around lazy loading and around what happens in the Angular CLI. And I want to walk through it just so that everyone can go, okay. And hopefully we have some people click into some aha moments, because Angular, or lazy loading, and this isn't a limitation of the Angular CLI, it's more a limitation, and it's not a limitation, it's more the design of how Webpack does it. It has some things it's doing that you don't think it's doing. So I want to walk through that misconception. So when we start a project, we have all of our code in one big file that we deliver to production, right? We have one big app. And we decide, hey, this isn't great for our users. I want to go ahead and we put all of our components in this big thing, and maybe some of us, we say, hey, this is too big. I want to break this out into smaller pieces. I want to have one app bundle, and then I want to have a bunch of feature bundles, and we add those load children magic strings through our app. And each of those lazy loaded bundles has components inside of them, components and services. And we expect that those components and services will get loaded when those routes get visited, right? And we don't expect that anything that's being used inside of a lazy loaded feature module is going to be included in the main bundle. Like that's what we expect. So, but that's not exactly what happens. So let's take a scenario. What actually happens is we get a main.ts in our Angular projects when we run through the build, and then Webpack makes this thing called the commons file. And the commons file is where anything that's used by more than one bundle will get put. So if you have two bundles that use the same thing, Webpack says, I'll put that in commons. So in our first feature, if we had foo component, and the only person that used foo component was that first feature, then we're good. That foo component will get included only in that feature module bundle, and we're good. But there's scenarios where the foo component will get used across the entire app. For some reason, we think it's not going to get loaded until one of maybe not all of our routes use it, but maybe just 2 or 3. And we think that won't get loaded until one of the 2 or 3 routes get loaded. But what happens, what Webpack's going to do, is it actually goes ahead for us, and it starts to pull those components out of the individual feature modules, and it starts to put them up into that commons module. And it does this efficiently without us really paying attention, and it does it at build time, and over time, as different people get into your app and start sharing things differently, things will start to get plucked out of your feature modules and included into a higher level, usually the commons module. And our feature modules end up being much smaller than we thought they were going to be. So the reason I'm explaining this is because a lot of people, what they do is they will make an ng module for every single component in their app because they want that component to be lazy loadable. And so it's coming from a really good spot. Like they're doing that, they're architecting it this way because they want efficiency. They want lazy loading. They want to be great at it. But because of this commons module, it's going to not do what they think it's going to do. So what they end up really doing is a futile exercise in creating a bunch of extra ng modules. And if you've done this, it's okay. It makes sense why you thought it was doing that. I'm just trying to point out this is a huge misconception. And if you architect your apps around one module per component, it's not working the way you thought it was going to work. And it's really easy to open up a new project in Angular CLI, create a couple of lazy loaded routes, and then have them use the same component, and you'll see that component will get included in the main bundle. So it's really easy to test this and show this theory happening. But that's largely the biggest misconception people have around Angular lazy loading. So most of the components many of the components that we think we're lazy loading are actually ending up in our commons chunk. And another way to say that is, even though we're trying to lazy load things, it actually stays in the main bundle, which is frustrating. It's kind of infuriating, and a lot of people, when they learn this, they get angry. And it's not a limitation of Angular. It's not a design flaw of the Angular CLI or the React CLI, because React has the same exact limitation in Vue. They're all based on Webpack, so it's really just a limitation of modern code delivery. So yeah, don't be angry at the Angular CLI is all I'm saying. How do we lazy load code without a route change? We're going to kind of talk about this. Maybe you want to lazy load it because it's an admin user. Maybe you want to do it because it's a large third-party lib. Maybe it's a modal is open, and that modal contains a bunch of stuff like we talked about. So there's 2 kinds of code that you really need to focus on lazy loading in your app. The first one, which is actually pretty trivial, is non-Angular code. So if you need to lazy load a third-party library, it's actually really, really easy. If you need to lazy load Angular code, that whole process I explained where you have to indicate which bundle you want lazily loaded and get it triggered and downloaded, and then register it with Angular, and then say, hey, of that lazy loaded bundle, I want you to load this component. That whole thing you still have to do. And there's an open source lib that kind of makes this a bit easier that we're going to kind of walk through today. So let me walk you through an example, and we'll live code this so everyone can see it, of lazy loading a non-Angular, lazy loading some non-Angular code. So in this project, because D3 is awesome and it's pretty popular, I'm gonna kind of walk you through, hey, this is how you would lazy load D3. So we're gonna go ahead and do a live demo, and there's no confidence monitor, so I have to. So we have this very simple Angular app. Besides the foo and the bar components, so I have a foo and a bar component. Besides those, this is a entry level. This is a base Angular project, okay? And let's go ahead and lazily load D3 when we do something. And something could be anything. It could be connection speed. We could check the admin, the user if they're admin. Like, it could be really anything. And we're going to kind of walk through that. So let's open up our Angular component. And we're going to add a load D3 method, okay? And in D3, actually, no, we're good. We're good. The CLI will take care of this for us. So if I just say import D3, and then I don't have to do this dot then. I'm just going to do it though. So it will give us our module. We can say console.log D3 has loaded, and we'll save it. And now we're just going to go ahead and call this whenever we want to. So over in our app, in our UI, let's create a div that we can put this code in. And we'll make a button, and we'll say load D3. Click equals load D3. All right, let's go over to our app. So let's pull up the network tab so we can see this. Now, when this loaded, actually, before we even show this, I want to show you the terminal. The second that I did that, it created this D3.js. The second I typed import, and I showed it D3 and hit save, there was a new bundle that got created. All right? So the CLI just kind of takes care of this for you. And now when I click this button, it's going to go ahead and load that bundle. So let's go ahead and watch this. So I'm going to clear out the network so we can see it happen. And it loads the D3 bundle. I'll click on it just so we can kind of see it. It's kind of all the usual suspects of a D3, the D3 array stuff. And so this is just the giant source of D3 that got lazily loaded. All right, so let's lazily load some Angular code. All right, the first thing we have to do, in Angular 7, the Angular team threw out an option to us, and we can add these lazy modules into our Angular.json down in this architect build options section. So if we go ahead and we point to a specific bundle that we want to lazy load, we can now lazy load that bar module by calling that same import syntax if we wanted to in our app. We still have the difficult time, the second part of registering with Angular, which I'll show you how I've made that easier. But you'll come over to these lazy modules in your Angular JSON, and you'll start to kind of put the things you want to manually lazy load. And this is for Angular code specifically. And you'll kind of list them out here. Now, you'll notice this string that we're providing it looks a lot like that magic string that we used to give to the load children, right? That's because that's the same string. It's going to Webpack under the hood. Okay, so it's still Webpack. So we're passing that down into the Webpack build and saying, hey, make a bundle for this thing. The next thing that we're going to do, so there's a package called HeroLoader, and HeroLoader allows you to, using a really simple API, lazily load code, and it does that difficult piece of registering it with Angular and then turning one of the components in that lazy load module on for you. So if you install the HeroLoader, and it used to be called LazyAF. Did anyone use LazyAF? Has anyone used LazyAF or HeroLoader? Okay. All right. And then in the UI, you'll put in the HeroLoader, and you'll give it that same magic string that you used to pass to the router. And as soon as you ng-if the HeroLoader on, so you have to make sure it's not on by default. And as soon as you ng-if the HeroLoader into the DOM, it's going to load something. Okay? So it's going to load it. So you have to make sure you have the ng-if, otherwise It'll load it as soon as the view loads. So it's actually pretty simple to get this going. So I'm going to go ahead and demo this for everybody. Okay, so we have the foo module. If we come over here, if I click on the foo, it's already going to load the foo module lazily, right? So that got loaded now. Now, we don't have any way to load the bar. Like, foo loaded because the route changed. So that's how foo got loaded. But we're going to now load bar, and we're going to do it on a click event, okay? And this click event, it could be any event. It could be a WebSocket push. It could be timing-based, internet connection speed-based. It could be anything. I'm going to use a click event just for the sake of this demo. So let's go back to the code. And we already went and did that lazy option, the lazy modules thing over in the Angular.json. So if I go Angular JSON, and I came down here to the options, oh, I didn't do it. Awesome. That would have been super embarrassing to try and debug this on the fly. Source, app, bar.module. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and kill my build and restart it so that it picks that up. And you'll see when it gets done building this that it's going to have an extra bar module now. The same way that it has a foo module, it now has, where's the bar module at? So it has a bar module as well. So it's picking it up the same way it's picking up any of the load children stuff. And it's processing it for Angular, so it's running it through the NGC and the TypeScript compiler as well. All right, so now let's go ahead and implement this hero loader in the API, in our UI. So let's open up the component HTML, and we'll add another div. Okay, I'm just gonna, because I don't want to create a new variable in my component. I'm just gonna keep it here in the DOM. So we'll add the hero loader, which is gonna bark@, because we didn't bring it into our app module. So once you install it, you just come to your app module, and you have to do an import on it. So the hero loader module, and then we'll go back here, and we're going to ngIf it out. If load.load is equal to true, then we want to load module name equals source app bar.module, and then we're going to do bar module. Now, one change I had to make with the bar module in order for it to know which component to turn on is I had to add in a bootstrap array, and I put in the component I wanted to turn on. Okay, so that's the only difference between a regular lazy loader module and this bar module. Is you have to specify which component's going to get turned on when this module gets loaded. So now that I've done all of this, when I save this and we go back to our app, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't add a button to flip that thing. Sorry, my bad. Button, load bar, and then we'll just do a click, equals load.load is equal to true. So when we click this button, it's going to go ahead and load bar, and then bar appeared down here, and it actually, where it got put in the DOM is, if we inspect the bar module, it got put right after the hero loader. So that's you can contextually place it anywhere you want in the DOM. Unlike with a route, you have to put it in the router outlet. With the hero loader, wherever you put the hero loader, it's gonna put whatever you're lazy loading. So it's very simple. If anyone wants to reach out to me, has any questions, I'm Aaron Frost on Twitter, or Aaron@hero.dev. And if you have any questions about lazy loading, you want to talk about this after my talk, I'll be around for the rest of the day. So anyway, thank you.